Mark Twain was one of the great American authors, with works such as The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. However, in this episode of the Boxy Babes podcast, we'll be looking at a different side of Mark Twain. Richard Thomas recently brought his one-man show, Mark Twain Tonight, to the Fisher Theater, channeling the humorist through a series of readings and monologues in Twain's own words. Spoiler warning, we will be discussing the touring production of Mark Twain Tonight, so if you want to go into the show without any preconceived notions, pause this video and return when you've seen it. If you're still here, welcome to the show. And joining me is Ryann Ferguson, honorary Boxy Babe forevermore. Thank you so much for joining me and for attending the show.
Well, thanks so much for taking me to the show and having me back on. It's always a joy to join the podcast.
Especially when we don't nail that intro and we just keep sitting here. Like, no one will ever see those great outtakes, but there was quite a few of them. So we're gonna jump right in. How familiar are you with Mark Twain's works? Because I gotta be honest, somehow we didn't cover those in high school where I went.
You know what? I'm a bad former creative writing student too, as well. I think I maybe read Huckleberry Finn, and that's a very maybe when I was a teenager, but not familiar at all.
I think it's interesting because I don't think that this was a part of the curriculum. Like, we had William Shakespeare, we had some other really great American authors that we covered, but for some reason Mark Twain was not part of the school district's desire for English classes. I just don't understand where it went.
It almost falls into that Shakespeare category, though, where it's the language can be kind of tough to teach.
Sure. That would make sense.
The writing style. And so I think they kind of have to pick and choose.
That would make sense. I mean, because this is a man who, first off, his name was not Mark Twain. Found that out researching this. His name was Samuel Langhorne Clemens, whose pen name was Mark Twain. But I mean, he was born in 1835. Mm-hmm. He wrote these works at the end of the 19th century. They're maybe not as applicable to the like what you said, the language of it's old English almost in a way, or it's while they're very quintessential American stories, they're not always easily accessible for probably Gen Pop of English classes.
Yeah.
Which is fine, and I think which is okay.
It's also one of those things where it's some of the topics that they touch on, not to discredit in any way, but there's almost sort of, I don't want to say better works, but you know what I mean? More influential in today's society works, Of Mice and Men and different things like that cover the same types of topics that he's covering, maybe in a more digestible way for people.
I'm going to be very honest. The only way I really know Mark Twain, before this play, I should say, was Easy A from 2010, where there's a running gag about Mark Twain and the adventures of Huckleberry Finn.
Yep.
Other than that, no preconceived notions.
My biggest influence from it was probably, doesn't he have a whole section at Disney, at least in Florida? Isn't there an island or something at Disney? I remember going and being what is that? You have to take a little boat to get there.
Fun fact, that is now gone.
They're always changing.
They are replacing it with Villain Island, I think, or they're changing it to Villain Land. But yes, there is an island that you can go to. I forgot about it. I blocked that out until you just said that. Yes, you have to take a paddle boat across the river to get there.
Yep.
Whoa,
didn't have a bunch of tree houses and stuff to climb through. I don't know that I ever went, but you could see it from. And I just remember being that's weird. Who is all of this about?
Yeah. I mean, but that does kind of sum up who he is. He is very much writing for, back then, the adventures of America. You're writing for the traditional American stories. These adventures of Tom Sawyer, and his growing up in the the South, during the 1830s, 1840s and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of these like quintessential almost American stories then that have impacts of today, but they're not necessarily what we're studying today in school. Also just read that apparently The Adventures of Tom Sawyer was originally considered a commercial failure, which I think explains also who he was writing for back then.
I mean, I feel like almost that's so many people from back then, though. I mean, look at Emily Dickinson. They didn't even find her poems until after she was dead.
That's fair. Because it wasn't always about being commercially successful. I recently read the thing that said like studios should make movies for art, not for profit. And I feel like that's kind of what it was back then. You were writing for the art of it, not necessarily for the profit of it. Like obviously profits are nice because we live in capitalistic societies. But it doesn't necessarily translate to like what that was back then, because people didn't always read at a high reading level and they didn't always have money for books and stuff like that. And there's a lot we can get into about that, but that makes a lot of sense that maybe that isn't successful as well. So I think that leads me to say then you probably hadn't heard of Mark Twain Tonight prior to me being like go to the Fisher Theater with me.
No, not at all.
So what did you think like going into it? As I'm like, I invite you to a lot of shows. You see a lot of like, I will say this, you see a lot of niche shows with me that a lot of other people don't always turn up for. And I feel like this is one of those that is very niche. What did you think when I was like, let's go see Mark Twain?
I was like, this sounds like a good excuse to get out of the house, do something fun that I wouldn't normally do.
I think that this is one of those shows that a lot of people wouldn't normally do. And I think part of that we have to go back to where it began. So I don't know if you knew this, but this was actually a revival. This had been done back in the 1950s by a man called Hal Holbrook, which I've heard of. And I think I even said this when I interviewed Richard Thomas. I was like, I've heard of him, but I couldn't tell you any of his work.
Yeah.
Looking at his list, he did things like Magnum Force, Creepshow, Wall Street. He was in some things that we knew.
Okay.
All of the President's Men, but this was a man who deeply loved Mark Twain, so much so that he decided to pen a one-man play where he depicts Mark Twain on stage talking as if he's Mark Twain. So I think like that's the amount that I knew about the show going into it. Like I was just like, okay, we're getting Richard Thomas on stage pretending to be Mark Twain. Now I want you to, if you would, for me, we walked into the theater. Can you set the stage literally of what was going on here? Because there wasn't much going on the stage.
Oh no, wasn't it like a very broken down living room type set almost, where it was like a chair and like one of those old timey desks like in the like off to the side, but it was all in the center of the stage. Like it was a very tiny stage.
Correct. There was two distinct areas. And granted, the Fisher Theater, it is not the biggest stage we have in Detroit. Obviously, that is the Opera House. That's where some of our bigger shows go. But the Fisher is still a pretty big stage. And most of the time, they fill that stage up. But when we walked in there was two distinct areas. There was a podium that had like a little setup over by the podium. And there was the chair and the desk and the lamp. And I think there was a rug. I could be wrong.
I would believe that.
But like that was set up on the other side of like the stage. And I walked in and I was like, what are we getting ourselves into? Like, what is about to go on? Because that's not normally what we see when we see a show as we're walking in there, correct?
No. Normally it's, curtains closed, big full sets. I'm trying to think if I've ever been to a show that was like this pared down.
I can think of one.
Can you?
I think of one, and you were there. Forbidden Broadway was very strict.
Oh, that was the one that popped into my head when you said I can think of one. I was like, Forbidden Broadway, yeah, that would make sense.
But even Forbidden Broadway had some bigger sets.
That's true, but they were kind of bringing stuff on stage as they were going. Like it was very like they were like because they were constantly changing between shows.
Exactly. And this one was literally, I think the best way to kind of phrase it is it was kind of like a stand-up comedian-esque set. You know what I mean? Of like, you're
That's
just
fair.
there.
I was thinking about that earlier too. I was like, if you were to ask me to describe it, I was like, and I mean this in the best possible way. It was like story time with a method actor.
Correct. Exactly
Like,
what it was.
yeah.
Um, which we will talk about Richard Thomas in a little bit because I think that he did a very good job of that. But truly, the concept was like they wanted him to be the person, Mark Twain, on stage giving speeches. And so basically it was like, what would happen if like a politician was touring and talking? Or like what would it be if like an author, your favorite author, I actually went to a book signing a year ago and the author was just on stage with a chair talking. And so it's interesting because that's exactly the feel of this was. It was like one person's going around America to tell America what's going on. It happens to be Mark Twain, which is so interesting for a show because I don't think we have shows like this out there right now.
No, none that I can think of.
There's one local production. I literally just interviewed them, and they're doing an evening with Charles Dickens,
Okay.
who's reading A Christmas Carol. And when I interviewed them, I said, I saw Mark Twain Tonight recently, and that sounds very similar, where it's one person pretending to be a real person on stage giving a show, and it's cool, but because it's so different. We don't see people, you don't see a lot of one-man shows. You don't see a lot of people going up on stage and just bearing it all for everyone to see.
No, because I think when most people think about going to see a show, it's the musicals, it's the plays, it's the big productions. Let's get dressed up, go out to dinner, let's go see this show. It's not something that's usually so pared down and quiet like this. Like this, it felt more intimate versus like big production.
You are 100% correct about that. So many people turn up, and I think that's why musicals are so prevalent right now. People show up for musicals. They show
Yeah.
up and they show out for musicals, but you don't always see people show up for plays. You don't always see people show up for like experimental theater because this is technically what this falls into. Because you're experimenting with the idea of like what is, and we had a pretty good turnout, but we also didn't have a full house. You know what I mean? So like this was not a show that everybody was turning out to because it's not everybody's cup of tea. And that was very obvious when we kind of walked in there.
hmm I think I even made a comment to you about it when we walked in.
Yeah. And in fact, we were sitting in probably the most populous area right in the middle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like towards the back of it as well, because we weren't even that far back. Like this was not a show that drew a lot of people out there, but in my eyes, it was one of maybe the most interesting ones because it was so different. So before we jump into the show itself, I do want to talk about one thing too. So the staging was very patriotic, which I think is a time a
hmm
reference like it's a good referral to the time that the show kind of takes place. It
Yeah.
was simplistic. There was definitely a little bit of red, white, and blue. There's a little bit of color. Um, the show definitely talked about America quite a bit. With the way the world is currently standing with the political climate, do you think that hurts a show like this, or do you think that it helps a show like this?
I think there's importance in recognizing where we came from. And I think that's
Okay,
a concept that a lot of people don't fully grasp because it's so easy to get tied up in everything that was wrong that we sometimes forget that it was the wrong things that got us to where we are now because we learned
correct.
from those things. So no, I don't think that it hurts a show like this. But I don't know that it helps either as far as like turnout type stuff goes.
I would agree with that. So I do wonder sometimes when things like this happen of like you want to bring people in, you don't want to
hmm
be too polarizing, which I do think that this show, even though it had a very um patriotic look, he did examine America through a very like a flat lens. Like he looked at it like a very like everything was open for interpretation and for discussion.
Yes.
Um but I did wonder of like, is this show, are there going to be some people that are not going to go see it because it feels patriotic because it's something like Mark Twain, who is like quintessential America again,
Mhm.
1800s, very patriotic. I wondered, I just was like, does this impact it? I'm sure that it impacts some people turning out. I
Yeah.
think that this definitely already was a niche show. I think that um, getting the general population to buy into some of that who don't understand maybe what it is are going to be slightly
Mhm.
turned off. It reminds me of Parade,
Yes.
which is a very dark time in America. It's a beautiful show. It's one of my favorite shows, but it definitely doesn't shy away from those bad things. And I think you're right that we can't stop talking about the bad parts that got us here. Because, girl, let's be honest, there are parts in our lives that we probably would rather forget, but like they made us who we are. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Like none of us would be where we are without learning from the past. I mean,
Absolutely.
in its sense, it's almost the most American thing is that you're gonna mess up a bajillion times in a bajillion different ways, and at the end of the day, you're gonna get better from it, I guess? I don't know.
And so that does draw me into the show, because I think what you just described there is pretty much exactly what Richard Thomas brought to Mark Twain Tonight, is that we were hearing stories about America that weren't always pleasant, but they were always like but we grew from it. Like there
Mhm.
was a lot of these connections of like, he would tell personal stories. He would tell stories about America. He would tell stories about things happening in Southern America,
Mhm.
and he told it through the lens of like the people need to grow and not be so stagnant,
Yeah.
which I thought was kind of beautiful. I thought there was a lot of beauty in this, because there was things like he talked about, like some of his thoughts were very like early feminism. There was things that he
Mhm.
was talking about, like women should have freedoms, and like people of color should have freedoms, and like
Yeah.
we're very held into that. What was Once we started the show, once we got into it, how did you feel about some of those things, like some of those stories? How did they like come over you?
There were a couple that made me slightly uncomfortable, but again, it was more of a time frame type thing than it was the content itself. But then there were some parts that were like honestly kind of inspiring.
Yeah, I would agree. I really liked some of the stories that he talked about, like specifically with like his grandfather,
Mhm.
and they were just like that. They were heavy, and they weren't always easy to hear. But I liked that we had this moment that we could kind of sit back and use humor to reflect on those things and why they're not great, and why he
Mhm.
himself could be like, yeah, these aren't great, and then also at the same time tell you how we could improve and how we could do better, which I think is so reflective of the time we're living in now. I
Mhm.
think that's such a big takeaway from the show, is that like the things that he was going through in the 1800s is not that different from 2025.
No, not at all.
Like truly, we are going through some of these paradigm shifts where minorities are struggling to have a voice. And then here's this man, Mark Twain, up on stage being like, yeah, that was rough, and like we should not do that again.
Yeah.
So while obviously I don't know who Mark Twain is, I mean, like, I don't know him personally. I've never seen videos. I've seen some pictures, but not Rob Thomas. That is the wrong Thomas. Richard Thomas was on stage embodying a real man, channeling a real man through some of his actual words. What did you think of the Mark Twain that was on stage, or like Richard Thomas's impression of who Mark Twain was? Because it was very distinct.
It was. It was very trying to think of like how to word this. I mean, it was powerful in a sense. He really commanded the stage with his part,
Yes,
like, and there were parts like he knew when the right time to get loud was and when the right time to kind of sit back was.
sure.
And I thought that was really interesting. I think he kind of, you know, for you and I, because again, we're never going to meet Mark Twain. We're not going to really know. All we have is written words. He gave a voice to those written words, and I think his interpretation was beautiful to watch.
It was so interesting because he had, and again, I know this has to come from somewhere. So be it whether it was Hal Holbrook that kind of took that on and developed this character, or had studied Mark Twain in some way, but like Richard Thomas had a specific way that he brought him to life. He had that little cackle that he did that was
Mhm.
just like so distinct, almost sounded like a smoker's cough. Like,
Yeah.
um, but he also like licked his lips a lot, and he did these things that were just so like those there had to be reasons to give Mark Twain
Mhm.
those. And if it wasn't because those were real things that Mark Twain did, that's interesting. And so I thought it was really cool that like the amount of studying he had to do to probably embody this man,
Oh, yeah.
it had to be a lot of work.
I'm sure I mean, I don't know much about his acting style, but I would imagine he had to method that for a while to, like, really get it down, because it's not something like it's not a normal script where you're reading this and it's, "Oh, my character's gonna walk across the stage and take a sip of this drink," or, like, it's not, like, staged like that, where it's like, these are just mannerisms of, "Oh, I finished this sentence, and so now I'm gonna lick my lips," or, like, like, different things like that, where it's like you have to come up with those kind of almost in the moment, because not you're not gonna do it the same every time.
I mean, he even talked about when I interviewed him that like the show's not the same every time because every time he pulls a different writing or reading,
Mm.
he pulls a different story, and he's trying to find his own way around that. And if you think about it, so going through some of his action credits right now, when I said I was going to interview him, my mom was like, "You're interviewing John Boy Walton from the Waltons." No idea who that was. I have never seen that show before. But I mean, he played Bill in the TV miniseries adaptation of Stephen King's It. Like this, he played
Okay.
he played Atticus Finch in the touring production of To Kill a Mockingbird, which I
Mm.
saw, and that he truly was Atticus in that story. So I think you're right that he is more method than a lot of actors that maybe we have right now. There's a
Yeah.
part of him that is trying to find who this person is, and the fact that he was hand selected by Hal Holbrook's estate to bring this character back to life, to bring this revival back to people, really shows that they knew that he was the right type of actor to find Mark Twain once again.
Yeah.
So I would say that this was probably one of my favorite shows that I've seen recently, specifically because I think Richard Thomas did such a fantastic job of finding Mark Twain. But like of recent shows that you've seen, where would the show fall? It's no Kimberly
I
or
think
Kimbo.
it's somewhere I think it'd go kind of somewhere in the middle for me. I think
Okay.
it wasn't something that I truly was like, "Oh my god, I love this," and I would go see this, like, 20 more times, but it wasn't like I would never see it again.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, I there were parts of it that I thoroughly enjoyed, but I'm a little more of a musical girl myself. I am.
That's
I do
okay.
like a good play, but
But it's got to be a play that's really something that's going to pull you in and make you
oh,
want to
yeah,
do it.
I've gotta be, like, captivated because with my ADHD, it can get kinda hard, like, I'll all of a sudden be focusing on this one specific actor over in this corner and completely missing what's happening over here.
You're like I'm a John Proctor is the villain type of girl. um
100%.
that's that's totally fair. I would say that I would go see this again. I think that this is a show that I could take away more from it each time I saw it, but I don't think
Mhm.
it's one that I would like actively seek, if that makes sense.
It does, yeah.
Like I would not tour around the show to see it. Like I would not be that
Right.
kind of person. But I think it's a show that like a lot of people could gain a lot of introspection about their life in the world that we're living in right now and how we can do better for all populations. And I think it's worth seeing Richard Thomas in the role because my God, he is really good in the role.
Yeah.
But it's probably not one that I would see all the time. I think
Right.
when it comes to shows, a lot of which happens with a lot of musicals, music makes it easy to swallow some of those things. And while Mark Twain Tonight has a very humorous side to it, which makes sense because he was humorist, um, sometimes plays are a little harder to swallow when it's so dark. You're like it's so heavy.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about that, but that's at least how I feel.
No, I mean, there've been plays that we've seen, like, at local theater shows where, like, they have heavier topics, and I leave it, and I'm just like, "Wow, that was an intense couple hours."
That's like a huge weight on my shoulders now.
Yeah. Like, it's beautiful, and it's so well done, but now I'm gonna go home and sit there and stare at my ceiling for, like, 30 minutes to, like, really process this.
And when you think of a show like Kimberly Kimbo, which is one of the more recent ones we saw together, like
Mhm.
It is a heavy topic, but the music makes it go down a lot easier. So
Oh,
even though
yeah.
you're thinking about it at the end, you're not like, wow, there's nothing great in life anymore.
Right.
Well then, I thank you again for going with me. Thank you for seeing the show. I think that Mark Twain, everybody should go and see it. And I'm really glad I got to see it with you. And Ryan, it's always a pleasure having you here with me.
It's always a pleasure to join.
And so that concludes our Mark Twain Tonight podcast. Look forward for more episodes coming soon. And thank you again for joining us here in our box seats. Till next curtain call.